I'm Dan Raviv at CBS News in Washington. Let's turn to Brian Montopoli. You cover politics at cbsnews.com. Well, let's start with Herman Cain. Was he irrelevant anyway? Does it make much difference exactly what day he drops out or doesn't drop out?
Well, the question for him at this point is sort of how long can he keep limping along if he wants to. A lot of scandal experts say, look, it's time to get out, but you know, it's Christmas time. He's got a book to sell, and if he can stay in, I'm sure he would like to stay in and be able to do that. This is a guy who was unknown at the beginning of this race. He's not going to be president. He's not going to have the Republican nomination, but he has been able to significantly up his brand and significantly up his ability to make money. And so staying in the race a little longer would help him do that. But, you know, he doesn't have a lot of money coming in terms of donations now, so that's going to be harder and harder for him to do.
Brian, the mere fact that he was the front runner for a short time and the things that he does believe in, including the 999 tax simplification, did that have some impact on what the other candidates are saying and promising?
Well, Rick Perry came out with his flat tax proposal after the 999 thing. I think they were all caught a little bit flat by how successful that was. That said, Mitt Romney has continued to focus on the general election. Newt Gingrich has run a very sort of untraditional campaign, and I think those two guys, who are probably our frontrunners right now, haven't seen a huge impact from Herman Cain, other than the fact that Cain was able to sort of suck up some of the oxygen while Newt was able to make his comeback.
And you say that Gingrich is running an unconventional campaign? How so?
Well, he doesn't have, you know, he barely has a campaign apparatus. He seems to think that he can go through this campaign without attacking anyone, without much of a ground game in Iowa and New Hampshire. And thus far, it seems to be working for him. I mean, he's at the top of the polls, but, I mean, we've seen Donald Trump, we've seen Michelle Bachmann, we've seen Rick Perry, Herman Cain, all these people at the top of the polls. The question is, does that translate into votes? Gingrich is looking pretty good right now. I tend to think, though, that some of these issues, the fact that he took a lot of money from Freddie Mac, the fact that he's sort of, you know, really a consummate Washington insider, is going to start to catch up to him. I mean, Republican voters haven't started paying attention to this stuff because he's relatively new to the top of the polls, but at some point it becomes hard to have everything float off your back. I mean, this is a guy who backed the individual mandate for health care, the thing that supposedly causes everyone not to like Mitt Romney. Well, Newt Gingrich did the same thing, and yet he doesn't seem to be stung by that. You have to wonder how long that can last.
How about Romney at or near the top of the polls for many, many months, but he can't seem to break upward? Does he have to?
Well, look, if you look at the positive and negatives when you ask Republican voters, they like Mitt Romney. I mean, 60% of Republican voters say, look, we have a favorable impression of the guy. I don't think this 25%, even though he hasn't been able to get past it, is a ceiling. They don't love Mitt Romney, but they're fine with him. I have the perception that most Republican voters, not all, certainly not Tea Party type voters, are going to be amenable to Mitt Romney as their nominee. Are they excited about Mitt Romney as their nominee? No, but if it's Romney, I think most Republican voters will be able to get on board.
Brian, are you seeing any changes in Romney's behavior? At times, a few days ago, he seemed to be, well, kind of tetchy when faced with tough questions, and he's not doing a lot of interviews.
Well, there was this Fox News interview that's sort of gone viral where he just looked very uncomfortable with Bret Baier, and you know, it was odd because he doesn't do these one-on-one sit-down interviews. He got asked, I think, questions you wouldn't be surprised to be asked, like questions about the individual mandate, and he was touchy about it. It was a poor performance by him, but Mitt Romney's a very good candidate in a lot of ways, at least at working with what he has, and I think he's going to iron out some of those problems, and the next time he does a sit-down, he's going to maybe not be quite so prickly.
And Brian, you have a story at cbsnews.com about the Tea Party, and of course we think back to early this year when Tea Party rallies were well attended, and the strength of that movement seemed to help Bachmann and Cain. Where are they now?
They're struggling. I mean, look, you look at the presidential race, neither Gingrich nor Romney is the kind of candidate that the Tea Party would like. I mean, they both backed the TARP bailout. The ostensible Tea Party candidate, someone like Michelle Bachmann, has completely faded in the polls. Rick Perry was going to make a play for them. He's faded. And then, you know, if you look at the Senate side, they only have one race, the Lugar race in Indiana, where they've lined up behind someone to try to take out a Republican incumbent. So the notion that they're sort of transforming the party in the way that they did in 2010 when they had Rand Paul, when they had Mike Lee, that isn't really happening this time around. Now, some Tea Partiers will say, look, that's because we're already in. We've already transformed the government to some extent, so there isn't this same sort of confrontational dynamic, but it's certainly a movement that's facing a bit of an identity crisis and probably isn't going to have the same impact in 2012 that it had in the midterm elections.
What's your assessment of Barack Obama's chance of re-election? But let's be specific with Friday morning's news that the unemployment rate fell from 9% to 8.6%. Good news for Mr. Obama.
It is good news, although if you drill down into those numbers, you'll see that part of that is because a lot of people have stopped looking for work. I mean, remain a ton of jobless folks out there in the country, and a lot of anger towards the president for his handling of the economy. Now, I think if you're a Republican right now, to some extent, you're kicking yourself because the president does look very vulnerable, but you don't have a candidate that really looks strong. Every single possible candidate in the general election for the Republicans looks vulnerable, which is why, to me, President Obama remains a slight favorite for re-election even in this difficult economic time.
Covering politics at CBSNews.com, that's Brian Montopoli. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you.